Queen of Katwe is based on the true life story of Fiona Mutasi. She grew up in a poverty-stricken slum named Katwe, which is south of Uganda's capital city of Kampala. Fiona and her siblings helped the family in supplementing their sparse income since their father had passed away by selling matza, which is a type of corn. Out of hunger, Fiona walked over 4 miles to a nearby Christian charity to get a free cup of porridge. It was there that she was first introduced to chess. Fiona's aptitude at chess caused the instructor, Robert Gatandi, to take an interest in her as a student of the game. In a game between the two, he commented, "She must be reading his chess manuals in order to be able to predict what her opponents plan to do in their future moves." At this point, Fiona's life is changed when she replies she does not know how to read. Subsequently, Gatandi's wife takes her on as a student and opens her up to an educational world that Fiona did not think was possible for herself or her family. From this point, she begins to excel in the field of chess, from winning national and regional championships to qualifying for the Chess Olympiad in Russia, where she unfortunately did not win, but she did learn not to let losing stop her progression in life. However, these successes are not the most important part of the movie. One of the most significant parts of The Queen of Katwe is where Coach Katandi teaches Fiona that losing doesn't mean you're a failure. Losing happens all the time. The moral of The Queen of Katwe is your personal growth that enables you to understand that winning and losing are part of life. And while it's easy to get discouraged and be influenced by failure, it's more important not to lose sight of the big picture and to keep pressing forward and striving to set and reach goals. And one of the things that in the movie that stood out to me is the reason why it was named the Queen of Katwe is because she liked the chess move, which is called queening, when you reach your pawn to the very end of the board, and you can now exchange that pawn for any piece, which is usually chosen to be the queen because it's the most powerful chess piece.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting fact that you shared at the end.
Yeah, I was glad
because
I didn't know about that.
Yeah, I didn't think I really connected why it was called that title.
Yeah, it's because of the queening. I played chess before, and that's probably one of the few reasons I was able to understand that. And I didn't understand it at the beginning. It took me the second time I watched the film to be like, okay, this is why it's called that.
As far as dialogue, but as far as scenery, they showed them by the lake a lot. And when I did some research, the main source of income for that region is salt from the lake, Katwe Lake. And a lot of the people suffer from toxic inhalation from the high concentration of salt because they have to stand in the pools chest high and extract the salt by hand. And also her father, he died of AIDS when she was very young. And that's why the mother was so headstrong and didn't want her children to go off and play the chess. One reason was because she was told that they were going to be used to gamble. And the other reason was because of her daughter, Knight, was running around with a ruthless kind of a guy who she later got pregnant by. And so she wanted to maintain what was left of her family by keeping them close to her. And that's also why she didn't want to take charity from some other male, that might want to control her by giving her charity.
I kind of covered the culture or Ugandan culture that's seen in the film. And I also researched a few things that Aaron brought up. So the film is based in Katwe, a slum in Kampala, Uganda, in which the majority of the families are in poverty and struggling to get by. And the filmmaker Nair captures the feelings of the dense, crowded streets and culture in Ugandan slums without shying away from the hard truths and reality of what life is like actually living there. And the cultural beliefs in Uganda revolving women's rights and duties in society are heavily rooted in gender, religion, and race. Traditionally, women's roles are subordinate to those of men, despite the substantial economic and social responsibilities of women in the Ugandan societies. But within this, there are complex generational traumas that are portrayed by Fiona's mother, Harriet, and other women in the slum that she lives in. And so Harriet comes from a cycle of poverty and children having children themselves. So she had all her kids when she was super young. And that's one of the reasons that she is so determined to keep her daughters away from the other male figures in the slums and from making the same mistakes that she did. women. And so I thought while watching the movie, Fiona is a really great example of a child stopping the chain of generational trauma that's seen in her family. And so she has like these really big dreams and goals that are much larger than herself and what anyone really thinks is possible of women in their culture. She kind of breaks all of those by like the drive that she has. So that kind of relates to what Erin was touching on as well.
Yes,
I think it's really great that you touched that though, because, and it kind of goes into my next a little more, but I liked that you spent a little more time on that because you're absolutely right. I think that like they did a very good job of showing the layers within the culture and that generational trauma, you know, and I was just very well said. I really liked how you talked about that. For me, the film gave the audience just like an honest and raw portrayal of life in the slums, and in particular, like the women in Katwe. But I wanted to focus on the country as a whole and how the limited opportunities affect the chances of moving outside of the norm within the community. So the living conditions and the opportunities haven't had much progress since making this film. However, there's been efforts by the Ugandan government for programs that are centered around building entrepreneur skills and practical skills to allow young people to be employable. More than 2/3 of the population is unemployed or underemployed youth, which is what Emily was mentioning. So when you consider what that entails, the country is essentially being led by, you know, young adults. So the United Nations reports that slum dwellers have a poor quality of life, have a higher risk of adopting unhealthier lifestyles, which is what Erin touched on with the gambling. That's also one of the things that popped up when I was doing my research. But also they have a poor psychological well-being and they're at a higher risk of diseases, which is also another thing that the two of you touched. And that lack of education continues to affect the future of young women with through unwanted pregnancies. Many are sexually assaulted, raped, infected by HIV. Furthermore, the communities and conditions of young women have only worsened, especially since COVID lockdowns. So there was a decrease in the assistance that they were typically receive in Katwe. And as far as like the volunteers and politicians, they were unable to provide more assistance due to the movement restrictions. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like the film brought more awareness to Uganda, but you're absolutely right, Emily, where like Fiona was a perfect example of the power of opportunities and like breaking the generational chain for herself and for her brothers. I felt like you led me right into mine, so that was awesome.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing those facts and kind of an update of how it is now in Uganda, and that they're still kind of facing those difficulties.
Yeah, I think it was pretty sad. Sorry, go ahead, Robert.
I was just going to say, watching the movie, you know stuff is bad in third world countries, but it's kind of an eye-opening experience to watch that in such detail like they did.
No, I agree, Robert. I mean, I think one of the things too is, you know, when you think of like such you know, Disney coming in and taking on this project and they did a really good job. You think about Disney as a whole and you didn't really see films like this at the time, you know, especially not with Disney. So I think that brought a lot of awareness, but I guess I also expected a little more involvement. But I guess it also goes into how deeply rooted these you know, generational trauma is, right? Like there's so much of it you can't undo.
Yeah, I wish.
Yeah, I agree. It's amazing to me how much we kind of take for granted when we see something like that.
I wish like movies like that were more mainstream, because I like really never heard about it at all until this class. And so like I feel like I wish more people like got to see it.
Oh yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I think it's one of those things though that like it's kind of sad to say, but I think it makes people uncomfortable to see, you know, because it's like, yeah, it's like what Robert mentioned, where it's like, you know, it really does make you internalize like what you take for granted. You really have to sit there and ponder that, like, and some people don't want to feel that, right?
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so for my research, I don't want to butcher her name, but directed by Mira Nair. She's Indian American, a filmmaker who has many different genres of directing credits under her name. One of her most popular works is a Bollywood film called The Namesake. So in the film, it pretty much showcased like arranged marriage as like typically, well, originally like arranged marriage is represented as a repressive system, but the film reimagines the relationship between love and arranged marriage in Indian culture. And it seemed to be like a common theme between her films to try and dismantle the concept of patriarchy and like the limits of what women can and can't do within her films. And I think it really carries on to this film in particular as well. And as a female filmmaker, like you really don't see many of those. And so I thought it was really just great that she like pushed forward not only just like a woman's story, but also like a Black woman's story, because those are especially rare, I feel like. And so I know like she's not of African heritage, so she probably does not fully understand like what it is to be a Black woman, especially in Africa. But I'm sure she could relate to her story, like as a woman of color, because I could definitely take away some things from this film, you know, being a person of color as well. Just what you guys were saying about like the generational trauma and stuff like that. But she did live in Uganda for more than 20 years. So I think she was a pretty good candidate to make this film because she did have like a basic understanding and she was part of the culture and society. So she was already like familiar with like the country and culture already.
Well, yeah, I wanted to add also, Jay, that Mira Nair, yes, she did live in Uganda for over 20 years, but in Indian society, arranged marriages are upheld still even today. And if the female doesn't fulfill her commitment, she can also be put to death, which is still part of Indian law, but it's not legal in a lot of other countries. That's why a lot of Indian people move, or at least females move away from India to escape some of those male hierarchy concepts. And also, I think she really did understand the African culture by living there that long.
I didn't know that about the arranged marriages. I know it still exists today, but I didn't know it was that severe even still.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And in India, it's, instead of like old tradition European, male's family paid the dowry. In India, it's the female's family that pays the dowry. And if that dowry isn't met, then the family is somewhat disgraced.
One of the things that I found about her, which I thought was pretty awesome, and I don't know if you ran into this too, was that she turned down a full ride scholarship to Cambridge, and instead she accepted a full ride scholarship to Harvard University, which I thought was such a, I don't know if I'm allowed to speak this way, right? Because of etiquette, but I thought that was a badass move for a woman. Like, yeah, that's awesome. Like, you have choices, girl. You know, that was awesome to read. And also, when I was looking up just more about her, I found that she wanted to be known as like a writer, director, actress, producer. Like, she didn't just want to be seen as like Indian filmmaker, you know, and I just think that just made her more powerful.
I didn't find that in my research, so thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty neat, just to see the progression she'd made in her life from where she started in Indian culture to Uganda to going to school in the States, and now she's producing prominent movies that we hear and see about.
Yeah, and what I also believe is that from what I understood when I read about her, her husband couldn't deal with some of it, and so he moved his son back to India, and she remained here in the States. But then I think her children returned later, but her husband was kind of a headstrong, traditional type of person, or is basically, I should say. Yeah, because now she's based in New York City, but I think the family moves, you know, her children and relatives come back and forth.
Only thing I wanted to say was that surprisingly she got no money from the movie whatsoever, which is something that surprised me. She did get a scholarship to Northwestern University, where she's graduated with a degree in management, works for Microsoft now. She did not receive a Grand Master's, but she did receive a Woman's Candidate Master's, which is a couple steps below Grand Master. And so that's a summarized version of the interesting things I had.
Yeah, that's Fiona, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I read that also about the Women's Candidate Grand Master.
Yeah, it's pretty unfortunate though that she didn't get anything, you know, any royalties off of that. So I'm like, it's based on your life. Like, what?
Yeah. Well, and I'd heard a rumor that, and I couldn't find this actually documented besides just the one article, that part of the reason the book writes, she had sold those partially to be able to purchase her mother's house, but I could not find that exactly documented. That